Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of CEO Conversations, the private practice podcast. I am super excited for today's conversation. We're talking about money. I love talking about money. I think money is just so interesting, and I love talking about money when you bring on a really good, sound financial partner, too. So, in today's episode, we actually have a guest. His name is Nate Hendrikse. He is the CEO and founder of Navigator Bookkeeping. And I loved the fact of the conversation that we had. We talked about healthcare economy and what does that mean for your practice financially, how you can scale confidently and making sure that you're not losing profitability as you hire. That's one of the most common things that happen. So it's a really great episode. And of course, his information is going to be in the show notes. I do want to make sure that I'm reminding everybody that we are in Q4. It is October, so you should be in two places right now, or thinking along the lines from two places. First place is, how do you want to end the year? Are you positioning yourself to end the year the way that you want to end the year? We still have time left. We still have days and weeks and months left. And then also, part of what happens in Q4 is you start to think about, what do you want for 2026? So if you are not putting yourself in the position for retreat planning with your team or retreat planning for yourself, you need to do that. If you are in a place of, man, this year was really hard, healthcare economy, I'm not too sure what to do, then I do want to make sure that I am putting out there, Private Practice CEO is available to you. If you are inside of your practice and you know, like, I really need to show up as a more engaged leader, I want to make more money, I want to have more freedom, more time, I'm tired of being in the weeds in my practice, I'm not too sure about the team that I have, if they're the right team to get me to the next stage of business growth, whatever that is, we do all of that inside of Private Practice CEO. So go ahead and see the show notes. Again, if you need a good financial partner, see Nate's information. If you are in a place where you're struggling with business strategy, leadership, just really showing up and owning your CEO status, then go ahead and see the show notes and apply for Private Practice CEO today. So I will talk to you guys next week and enjoy the episode. Bye. Welcome to CEO Conversations, the private practice podcast. I'm your host, Brandy Mabra. It's time to show up as a confident leader to create a practice and life you love. Hey, Nate. Welcome to today's CEO Conversations. I'm so excited to have you here. So I know before we hit record, we were just chatting through some things about money and different mindset shifts that people can have about money. And just the rhythms and cadence of things. But before we get into all of the juiciness of today's episode, would you be open to sharing a little bit more of information about you, yourself, your story, and we'll start to dive into all this financial talk.
Yeah. Hey, Brandy. Thanks for having me. Always fun to chat. Yeah. Happy to share a little bit about how I got into this world. I was actually a third grade teacher when I came out of college, which, for someone who runs a bookkeeping agency, it's surprising. So I was teaching third grade for 4 years. A lot of fun, but also probably the most stressful time of my life. I would come home most days and say to my wife, like, this was a tough day. This is a tough day. And, when you're doing that for multiple years, pretty quickly you come to the realization, maybe I should look elsewhere. Right. So a lot of learning from that. Definitely learned how to teach difficult concepts in a simple way, and just interacting with people and problem solving. So a lot of good learnings and a lot of fun, honestly, too. But I started the business after those 4 years of teaching. I kind of started that prep work a couple of years into the teaching game, and then started the business full time. That was about 8 years ago now. When I started the business, it was the best thing. I was like, this is amazing. I get to work whenever I want to. I have that flexibility. When you're teaching, your schedule's very structured, right? And starting a business was like, wow, this is amazing. I can kind of do this whenever and just kind of go out and meet people and network. So a lot of fun. It was definitely a slow start. I was pretty naive about how quickly it was going to take to build up the business. I wasn't worried. I was very confident, but it did take a bit. My wife told me later on that she was a little concerned how long it's taking to bring in the clients. But I wasn't worried. I was like, this is great. This is so fun. But I started the business 8 years ago. Yeah, it obviously built up from there. We kind of generally just worked with all different businesses, different types of businesses. And pretty quickly, I realized that I wanted to niche down a little bit to really add some more value to specific industries, right? To be able to come in and say, hey, we really understand this industry. We can come in and help answer the pain points that you have right away, instead of relearning a new industry every time. So tried with a couple different industries. Eventually I connected with an old friend. His name is Brent Stutzman. He's in the private practice world, specifically with mental health, and he owns a marketing firm. And he's like, hey, I'd love to refer you some clients. I want you to try out the mental health world. So I started working with some counseling practices, really loved the people, really loved the industry and the good that they were doing in the community as well. And kind of dove in with both feet. So that was about 4 years ago, is that we kind of dove into the private practice world. And since then, we've really just been, yeah, diving deeper and deeper into that world, going to, industry events, connecting with so many practice owners, and just seeing all the different sides of private practice, which has been really fun. The team's been built up over that time as well. So, one of those things where you look at 8 years of business, you think, wow, the first 4 years and the second 4 years, so different. But it's also exciting to think about going forward in the business. What will the next 4 years look like, as well as we keep going deeper and deeper into private practice and just coming alongside more practice owners.
Yeah, I love your story so much. I know when we talked prior, when you said that you were in education as a teacher, and so to make the jump over to numbers, I was like, oh, that's so cool. That's so neat. I'm always curious because we work with a lot of private practice owners, and just when we talk about money and just some of the financial things that can happen, especially with today's economy and some of the shifts and things that we're seeing when it comes to payers and Medicaid and one big beautiful bill, like all of that. What are some of the
Mm-hmm.
common like financial binds that you have maybe seen for private practice owners that they've had to navigate through?
Yeah, for sure. And it's a really interesting industry, right? Thinking about private practice or just healthcare in general, because it is, like you said, so influenced by legislation, right? You can be in one situation and then some legislation comes through and all of a sudden you're in a completely different situation, which is so crazy and different from a lot of other industries. I mean, I think the most common financial bind that we see is cash flow, right? Is cash flow getting really tight? Um, when you're needing insurance to reimburse you at certain rates, you have less control for the revenue that's coming in, right? It's not like you can just say, oh, we're going to raise rates. Now, of course, there are many practices that are private pay or cash pay, which is, a little bit of a different situation. But for many practices who are insurance based, they don't have that control over the revenue side. So they really only can control how much they're paying out for expenses, paying their team, paying themselves, things like that. So they have less levers to pull than, a business in a different industry. So oftentimes, because that cash flow can get really tight, where you're giving raises, you're paying your team more, you want to be really generous to your team, and pretty soon your margins are razor thin. So that's the most common bind that we see is practice owners are going in, they want to do really great work in the community, they want to pay their team really well, but then they go a little too far on that, and then they're stuck where, hey, we can't now take back pay from the team, but also we can't necessarily raise our rates because maybe that's insurance based or legislation based in some way or something along those lines. So that's probably the most common piece, and that impacts cash flow, which then makes running a business very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy that you said that because I think a lot of people get stuck in like revenue, expenses, and then profit. But there is like the fourth bucket, which is super important, is cash flow. So even on paper, as you know, you can look profitable on paper, but you feel something different when you look at your bank account or when you're going to go make payroll. And that comes
Mm-hmm.
down to cash flow. So I know before we started talking, you were talking about cadences and rhythms because when it is insurance, Blue Cross Blue Shield hasn't paid us, or even what happened last year with Change Healthcare,
Yeah.
and that cash flow piece is so critical. For me, as we're building practices and scaling practices, we look at what do you need for your payer mix. Definitely incorporating the payers that do pay more readily, of higher reimbursement rates, faster, have better systems and processes. But sometimes you just can't control if it's going to take 60 days for you to get the check from the services that you provided. And so having a nice hybrid is what I've found just from my
Mm-hmm.
experience, is having like the reimbursement and then also incorporating self-pay or private pay,
Mm-hmm.
where so that way you don't have all your eggs in one basket. I know even, and I'm curious to know too, we could probably dive into some of this, what you're seeing for the folks who have all cash pay and what they're having to do in this economy. I know from what I'm seeing is that they're having to insert maybe some type of payer. They don't have all the payers, but maybe just one or
Mm-hmm.
two to take like the edge off because of the economy that we're in and people trying to pay bills and things. I think it definitely depends on
Mm-hmm.
your demographic and region and all this stuff.
100%. Yeah.
But I'm curious just when you hear that, what comes up for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're spot on, and just finishing or touching on what you said about the cash flow. I think cash flow is so difficult because you're also thinking about paying yourself and you're thinking about paying taxes. So when we're thinking about how do we bring in enough profit to make some cash flow happen, right? It's such a more complicated equation because it's not just revenue minus expenses. It's profit minus distributions, minus taxes, minus loan payments. And that's where that cash flow piece gets so complicated. But yeah, to your point, private pay can be a way to get around that, right? Because you can then, like you said, pull that lever to control the revenue a little bit more, increase those rates. But like you said, obviously, then you're dealing with the consistency of is the market around you able to pay your rate? Do you have the volume needed to pay your team, pay yourself, all those things? So, yeah, I mean, I think like you said, bringing on maybe one payer to give you a little bit of variety, at least give you a little more consistency, especially in those low months. Like summer months, so difficult for so many practices, or beginning of the year can be very difficult for a lot of practices. So having that consistency of that payer coming in and providing at least a chunk of your revenue can be really helpful on that side. But I think, yeah, the thing with private pay is that you need to be in the right space. You need to have the right market, right? I think oftentimes the best, the private pay practices that we see that do the best are the ones that are really focused, where they're saying this is the problem that we're solving, like nobody else, right? We have a practice that we work with that does intensives, and the practice owner is amazing on therapy intensives. People will come down for 3-4 days and their lives are changed because her level of practice is just insane. And she's all private pay, but that's because people fly from around the country to come find her. So if she was just out there saying, hey, I'm just doing general therapy, anyone wants to come in, come down, that model's not going to work, right? But because she's so laser focused and people know her, they know how skilled she is, that's where private pay really can make a big impact. So I think if you're right in the right demographic, but even more if you have that niche or that problem that you really can just solve better than most other people, that's where private pay can really make sense. And then again, yeah, it's a great situation where you can control the levers a little bit of saying, hey, we can raise our rates if we need to. We can shift how many sessions we're doing, and we can control a lot more than being beholden to a payer or something along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about rhythms and cadences, what is like best practice? What are some of the rhythms and cadences that you help private practice owners implement inside of their businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with kind of the basic cadences of it sounds boring and unexciting, right? But is our bookkeeping solid? If you don't have bookkeeping that is accurate and up to date, most other things fall apart, right? You might have the coolest looking dashboard of all the KPIs, but if your bookkeeping's not up to date, that's useless to you. You might have a great consultant who can tell you, hey, here's a solution for this, this, and this. But again, if your numbers aren't great, that consultant loses their ability to really influence your practice. So at baseline, I mean, you have to have bookkeeping that's timely, right? If the month closes, you want your numbers within a week or two at top. So you don't want to be waiting 4 weeks. And you also just want those numbers to be correct. I mean, so often we see practices where their bookkeeping's up to date, but payroll's off. So it's like, well, can we even trust these numbers? I was talking to a practice yesterday and they're doing really well. They have a lot of really cool things happening, very, very fun call to be on. Cause like you guys are doing a lot of really fun things, but their bookkeeping's 2 months behind and their payroll was really messed up, like really misclassified. So it was hard to look at their numbers and give them actionable insights because we're looking at numbers and it's saying, well, you're paying this percentage on payroll, but we don't actually know if that's a true number, right? So I think at baseline, you have to do kind of the unexciting piece first and just get into that rhythm of having timely bookkeeping and accurate bookkeeping. Once you do that, then you can build everything else off that, right? Of getting into the rhythm of let's make sure that we are looking at our numbers every week or every 2 weeks. Let's make sure we are tracking, on a dashboard. And again, a dashboard can be really simple, but just a simple dashboard. Like, what are those KPIs we really want to be aware of? Whether that's the volume of visits coming through, maybe it's retention, maybe it's, the revenue per session. But like just having some sort of cadence of looking at those numbers and then using those to inform your decision making. So it's really let's have that bookkeeping. Let's have some sort of regular cadence to look at those numbers. And then from that point, you're doing better than most practices, honestly. Like those are the hard things, just that regularity and that frequency. And then once you do that, then you can start to build out kind of the more exciting things, right? Of whether that's bringing in someone who can have some really specific industry insights, whether that's just having those KPIs to say, cool, now we know where we are. Where actually are we going, right? Like where do we actually want this practice to go, and what are the numbers we're actually trying to hit? But yeah, it's oftentimes the most simple thing needs to happen first before you can build off that and do anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I love everything that you just said because I think when folks, there's a difference between when owners actually, and even with for the clients that we work with, we always have them do CEO time at least once a week to go through KPIs, look at weekly metrics, making sure that profit makes sense, making sure sessions make sense, being proactive, like we're getting ready to go into Q4. who's already scheduled, who's on the books, who's getting ready to come up, who might no longer be on the schedule. Are your providers being proactive? Because I think when you start to have a team, then these numbers become so much more important, and you don't really have the luxury of, oh, it's been 2 months since I sat down and looked at my, looked at my numbers,
Yeah, yeah.
or where what I love too that you just talked about is like the month end process. So I hear it from a bookkeeping standpoint, but I think it's important for you to have like within the week to have in the team that you're working with, the financial team that you're working with, to have those things categorized at least the first part of the month so you can actually see how did we perform, how did we do, where did the
Hmm.
money go, so that way you can make a change going into the next month. I think from a billing perspective, what I see is folks don't necessarily have like a defined month end billing process where all the claims are entered, every
Hmm.
kind of dollar that you can actually get is accounted for, or the services that you've provided are all entered into the system. And so that way your
Hmm.
billing team can make sure that they're doing their part. So that way the cash flow can come in for the next month. So I think when we talk about cadences and rhythms, it's easy to get bogged down in the weeds and forget about things. But to your point, when you do these things, you are doing better than so many owners, and you're able to
Right.
scale faster, have a more financially healthy practice, and you can make changes. So I think people have more control in their practices than what they think that they do. So
100%. Yeah. And I guess two thoughts on that. The billing is such a great point to bring up. We just had two practices we talked to who went from doing really well overall to all of a sudden having really serious cash flow issues. And they came to us, they're like, we don't know what's happening. We have no idea. So we went into the books and did a deep dive, and we found a couple things, but not enough to really give an idea for why is cash flow so different. So we brought in a billing specialist to say, hey, you need to do a deep dive here. And it was a billing problem in both places, right? Where payer wasn't paying what they needed to pay, or claims were entered incorrectly. And it was, I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Which
yeah.
can sink your practice very quickly, right? And just again, like you said, if you don't have that process of saying, let's make sure everything was entered incorrectly, that builds up over time and you don't find out about it until 6, 9, 12 months later. And then by that point, it's a big problem rather than, finding it 3 weeks later and be like, oh, cool, it's $400 and now it's fixed. So I love that. It's a great point. And that's such a key part of that month end close process of not only the books, but also the billing, the claims, making sure everything's really, really tightened up there. And I guess just the second point I thought about while you were speaking there and bringing up so many helpful things is so many practice owners, I think, feel shame or guilt about
Mhm.
their money and about how they manage the money. And I think they feel like they need to be doing so much more than they are, right? They see people posting on, LinkedIn or social media being like, oh, this is all the things that I do. This is my process. But again, it just needs to be a simple process. So I don't think there's a high barrier to entry, but people feel like there is. They're saying, oh, I feel like I have to have an MBA, or, I must have a CFO. You don't need those things. You just need to have a simple monthly process. Like you said, look at the bookkeeping, enter your KPIs in a simple dashboard. And if you're doing that, you are doing amazing. And again, that's not a ton of work. It's just you need to do it consistently and infrequently, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think when you get to a certain place of revenue, then having a partner like in your firm, like where you can actually talk to folks who can help take the emotion out of it or have additional accountability, because there's so many mindset shifts that have to happen, or like emotions or mindset, just abundance or scarcity or whatever
Mm-hmm.
is happening, things, the money story that can come up as you're sitting there just looking at a dashboard, or just looking at, okay, this is how many sessions that we have. Really, when it comes to business, and what I always say, it's like it's one big math equation. If you want to make more money, work your math equation. If you want to save on expenses, look at where
Mm-hmm.
you're spending money. And do you want to continue to pay for that, or do you not want to continue to pay for that? If you have a team member if you have a team member that is struggling, and to your point where folks are overpaying because we're so heart centered, then what can be done about that situation? And then, so I think for the point that you're bringing up, the emotions and so many things, like even some of the trauma, for a lack of a better word,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to the financial piece, can come into just sitting down for an hour and looking at your numbers. So it's very true. It's always easier said than done when it comes
Yeah,
to the
of
financial piece.
course.
But I think when you have somebody that you can actually, what you did with your client, where, oh, let's take a deeper dive, or let's get a billing specialist in, or
Mm-hmm.
let's see exactly what's happening so we can get your 6 figures of revenue back.
Yeah, and what you said about it making the numbers non-emotional, I think is again very difficult but very important. And I think that also comes down to that financial team, and that's
Mhm.
not just us. We're oftentimes part of that team, but if you have coaching or consulting, right, like that's a big part of that. If you have a CPA, that's a big part of that. Even a financial advisor. But as you grow and as you scale, I think building out that financial team is really key, and making
Mhm.
sure that financial team can work together to really give you that full financial story. We always talk about, what are the financial blind spots in your practice? What are those things where it's a number that you see, where you say, that number doesn't quite feel right, but I don't know why. And
Yeah.
I think your financial team can be kind of going through that process of slowly finding those financial blind spots, alleviating those, and then giving you that financial confidence to really understand the financial story. Like, where have we been? Where are we right now? And where are we actually going? And I think that doesn't happen just through one of those people. I think it is a team approach, especially as you scale and get larger, where, someone's coming in and doing some coaching and consulting, they can use the numbers from the bookkeeping team. And that's also tying into the tax side with the CPA, right? So I think that's the biggest, one of the most helpful things is to be able to offload some of that, where your team can come in and look at it non-emotionally and just neutrally and say, hey, this is good or this is bad, and that's okay. We're not going to feel guilt or shame about that. Just what we want to do next. Like you said, we're just deciding what lever we want to pull to move the business forward and make that equation work. So I think that is the helpful piece of what we do, what you do, what others in the industry do, is being able to come in neutrally and say, hey, we're not going to come in and judge you. I have so many practice owners say, please don't criticize my numbers. Don't judge me. And I'm like, I'm never going to come in here and judge you. We're just coming in and saying, how can we help? Right. We're just looking at it from a neutral perspective. This is good. This is bad. This needs improvement. This looks amazing. And I think that's the fun part about a team approach, is bringing in more people as you scale to give you more aspects and views on that to keep you moving forward.
Yeah, it becomes almost like your board of directors, just to help
Mm-hmm.
give things like perspective of what's true, what's not true. And so I always tell my clients, like, I don't have the same emotions as what you have. And I'm coming from a place of, you want this amazing practice, you have this big vision, you want to make, for some of our clients, like global impact, which I love. Okay, let's start here, where you're at now, and
Right.
take a deep dive. And from that vision, when you have that global impact, then it's going to definitely be important for you to look at your numbers and things too. So I think it's really helpful when coming from a place of service, because we want everyone to succeed. And so I think it's always nice when you have a team to be supportive of you. So I'm curious, because I know a lot of times people want to grow, so even speaking of like the global impact, people want to be able to scale, they want to be able to make more money or hire additional team members, be able to have, like, even for some of our clients, like multidisciplinary. So what are some of the things that you see for metrics that folks need to track, or what do they need to do, or what they need to pay attention to before they actually take the leap into scaling?
Yeah, I was just talking at a conference, speaking at a conference last weekend, and one of the slides I was talking through, I was talking about how to implement a bonus plan and create a bonus plan. But one of the slides was about the prerequisites to creating a bonus plan. Like, what should you be thinking about before you do this to make sure you're in a good place? And I think that's maybe a similar format to think through this question, right? Of what are those prereqs we want to check in on before we scale and really take that deep dive into where we're going. I think going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, you need to have profit, obviously, and along with that, you need to have cash flow. Those are the two basics, right? And I'll go back from that in a second. But I think if you don't have those two pieces, scaling is going to be really difficult. You're very quickly going to need to either inject more money yourself or bring on debt in some way to finance scaling. So if you don't have that cash flow, if you don't have that profit, it's not going to work. You have to have, there are two sides of the same coin, right? The profit has to come through, and then you still need to be able to have cash flow building up your cash in your accounts after you're taking distributions, paying taxes, paying loans, any of that stuff. But I think really, to have positive profit and to have positive cash flow, the metrics you need to look at are what percentage of revenue is being spent on your operating expenses, what percentage of revenue is being spent on your team. We would call that your cost of goods percentage, right? Basically, what's being spent on the team to do the service, and really getting a feel for where that is and how those influence profit margin, right? So, for therapy practices specifically, which are different from some other private practices, right? Like if we're looking at a speech practice or physical therapy practice, the numbers will look a little bit different from this. But for therapy practice, just to give an example, we would want total therapist pay, so benefits, taxes, wages, to be less than 60%. Ideally, more like 55%, maybe even 50%. But for most practices, 55 is a decent goal. We would want operating expenses to be 20 to 25%. And this is of revenue. So if you have $100,000 in revenue, you want to be spending $20,000 to $25,000 on operating expenses, and $60,000 or less on cost of service, which would be therapists. So I think getting a good feel on those metrics before you scale can be helpful to feel like, all right, is our pay structure even set up for success? Where if we add on 10 more providers, is it still going to work, or is it only working right now because myself as the owner are doing it? I'm doing a ton of sessions or something like that, So I think when you're thinking about scaling, you want to make sure that those bones of the practice are in a good place, the structure is in a good place, that the pay structures are set up to continue to provide profitability, not just maybe they're in a fluke right now. So oftentimes what we'll do is we'll run some numbers, do a little bit of forecasting to say, all right, if we're hitting profitability numbers right now, if we add on 5 more providers, can we still hit those? Like, will the numbers still work? So I think it doesn't need to be a super complicated spreadsheet or anything like that, but I think you do want to run some numbers to make sure that especially those pay structures will still make sense. The operating expenses too, but I mean, operating expenses to me are easier to fix than pay structures. Pay structures are the most difficult piece to change. Because again, once you offer benefits or raises or something to your team, taking that back is going to be really difficult, and you're going to have turnover, right? So before you take that jump into scaling, I would make sure I was really confident that my pay structures would keep making sense and would continue to be profitable. And then from that point, operating expenses, some of the other things I think can get worked out down the road if they need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's often times and as you know, I work with 7-figure, multi 7-figure, higher revenue where there's more of like, oh, you've hired all of these people and the pay structure is off, or you've overextended yourself, or they now get a cut. Like, so even from the therapy practice, like the split fee, I hate split fee. Everyone who knows, like, I absolutely hate it. But it's like, how do you fix that? And it becomes more of a complicated conversation because you have to go back, rework a contract. Usually people don't want to make less money. If they make less money, they're going, even if they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm cool with this, they're out looking for another job, just so you know. It's very, very complicated. And so oftentimes when we do start working with clients, when they're that far in the game, then we're having to scale back. And there's some clients where they've been able to even get to multi-6, and we have to scale back. And so they go through turnover, then they're stressed out because of the turnover. And then we're trying to give them fresh start. So let's hire the new provider who doesn't know that you used to pay this amount of money so you can fix the mistakes, and then trying to even just maintain the practice from going out of business. So it's very complicated. So I want everyone who just heard what Nate said to think about what you're doing for the providers today, and is that scalable for the future for compensation model? Because if not, then when you fast forward a couple of years, you're going to be mad. You're not going to be able to necessarily be able to pay yourself the amount of money that you want to pay yourself and all the things too. So that's a gem. Like, if no one else gets anything else out of what you just said, I think that it's a gem, because I live it in real time every day with some of the clients. And it's just like, oh, I know you're sad. I know, but it's almost fixing some missteps that are okay. Like we've been able to fix them and things like that, but it's still very stressful. And when you're at the beginning stages and you're only hiring your first 1 or 2 providers, it's so much easier to, do something different as you're scaling. So please listen.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, it's the number one problem that we work with clients on, right? Is, man, we are paying a lot to our therapists. How do we fix this? And like you said, oftentimes you have to break it down before you can build it back up. We had a practice where she was small starting out, but she had five therapists, realized that her pay structure was way too high. And she transitioned, lost all of them, and started back with just herself, and then is rebuilding it up. But she was dedicated to that. She's like, I know I got to do it. It's going to be painful, but I'm going to go through it now. And that's a whole lot easier with 5 therapists than, the practices that we see that have 60 and they're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
There's so many more obligations at that point. You're so much more known in the community. So the earlier you can do it, the better. But it is truly a painful and tough process to go through, which doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do sometimes. But yeah, again, like you said, the earlier you can do it, the better. Run those simple numbers. Make sure you can scale based on those pay structures, and it'll save you a lot of heartbreak down the road.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what are some of the financial structures that you see impacting folks when they want to expand locations or invest in new offerings? Do you have any thoughts on on what you see in from the clients that you work with there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to keep talking about the pay structures, but that does matter a lot, of course, as far as like, hey, if we're trying to start a new location, like how does that work? Do we have this? But I think really the financial structure that you want to start with is asking the question of like, can we afford this? Or, maybe even to put it more simply, like, is this a good idea? So I think doing some sort of forecasting or running the numbers ahead of opening a new location, investing in a new offering, anything like that is really key, right? Just to again say, put it in a simple spreadsheet, or yeah, I was going to say paper, but yeah, spreadsheet would be the best. But put it on a simple spreadsheet to say like, if this happens, can we afford this? And if this goes poorly, can we still afford this? Right? Like run if this goes well, run if this goes poorly. What does it all look like? And again, you don't have to have crazy macros and crazy formulas. It's just simply figuring out like, what do we think our revenue is going to be? What are our costs going to be as far as pay structures? What are our operating expenses, and how much is left over after this, right? And like, will this actually make sense? We have a client who is one of those visionaries, right? Who's always thinking about new service offerings and always wants to be like bringing new people into the practice to add a new dimension to that, which is great. I love that. The problem is that sometimes he will run a little bit faster than the numbers will run, right? So he went out and offered a job to someone to start a whole new service offering at his business without like running any of those numbers. And he offered a very, very high pay scale. And now he comes back, he's like, hey, just so you know, I offered this split. It's a percentage split, like you said, I offered this split to this person. I'm super excited. They're going to do amazing. And we ran the numbers and, it's basically going to be break even. That split is so high that it's like, you're not going to lose money. But I mean, after all the time that you invest, the admin time, furnishing the office, doing all these things, you will lose money just based on all that time. And I think that's a really tough conversation to be like, I know you're really excited about this, but is there any way you can not do this? Like, can we pull back? Can we stop the train? And I think running those numbers again, just simply, it would have been a 15-minute calculation, right? Would have solved all that and would say, hey, let's just offer less. Let's go in at this rate instead. And then we can build this out over time. But instead now we're kind of pigeonholed, right? Where this has already been offered to this person. They're planning on it. And now we're gonna have to make it work. And it's not going to be profitable for a long time. So that's pretty difficult, right? So yeah, I think whenever you're thinking about, that excitement's coming through, you entrepreneurs, all of us, we love new initiatives. We love new solutions and new things, but before you open that new location, before you do that new service, I think run some simple numbers, make sure that even if it goes less well than you expect, it's still going to be positive and you can afford that in the short term, and then, can kind of plan from there.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a checklist that we give our clients, and one of the check boxes is, have you talked to your accountant or your financial person about doing this first? And what's
That's
the budget?
great.
Like, what is that? Because it's so important, whether you're adding a team member, expanding locations, a new service line, like all of it requires resources. And so for the folks who might be listening who have multiple services that they're providing, even within a practice, then the way that I look at it is service lines, it's like its own individual business. And so you have within the business, right? And so the team, what you're talking about, like if you have to furnish, like if there's equipment that you have to buy, and depending on the specialty, if there's medications that might be involved, like all of it. And so that is literally a service line that needs money. And you could put yourself in a position of where that service line could not be profitable, or it just doesn't make sense. And so it's not really adding value to the rest of the business. So I just love the work that you're doing. I think that there's so many gems in what we've talked about. For just the last minutes, what is, like, if you had the number one tip or the number one thing that you want to leave people with, what is that for you?
Kind of like we were talking about at the beginning, have bookkeeping that is updated regularly and accurate, and look at your numbers consistently. Look at your KPIs, put them in a dashboard, look at them consistently, right? I have a dashboard for Navigator. It's not complicated. It's probably the ugliest spreadsheet, that there is. If someone looked at it, they'd be like, don't you own a bookkeeping firm? This should be like more color coded and have graphs. It doesn't have any of that, but it's really helpful. Just really simple. Here's the metrics I want to track. Here's what I want to look at. And here's what I want to keep in touch. You track what's important, right? So think through, like, what are those 4 to 8 KPIs that you want to track. Have really good bookkeeping and data so that you can update those regularly, and then take a look at them. And then that gives you that financial story of your practice that you can then make confident decisions. One of the worst things you can do is make decisions, without looking at the numbers, by just going off your gut. have the data available and look at it regularly so that you can confidently make those decisions and say, yeah, something could go wrong, of course, but I know that if it goes as we think it's going to go, or at least close to that, it will work, right? Even if it doesn't go well right away, we can make the adjustments, but make sure that the end game is profitable, the end game makes sense. And again, that dashboard can be really simple. But just taking a look at that with that updated bookkeeping, I think is the best thing. And again, I wish I had something that was like, oh man, this is so groundbreaking and new, and I've never heard this before. But oftentimes it's the simple things that make the change, right? It's like with anything in life. If you can do something consistently and well, it's going to move the needle forward. So I think, getting that bookkeeping updating that dashboard and just taking a look at it, taking a glance, taking 15 minutes a week makes a huge, huge, huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So I take that back because I had said, this is the nugget of information that I want you to listen to about before you hire additional providers. This is the number one thing that I want everyone to listen to. So time to look at your numbers too. So just so many gems. I love that. Cheers to the ugly spreadsheet, because I think what happens is people think that it does have to have all the formulas and all the pretty colors, and no, like just whatever you're going to look at so you're informed and you're able to make informed decisions. Amazing. So I just love it. I love it so much.
Yep.
Yeah. So Nate, where can people find you? Because I know that there's going to be some folks that are going to be reaching out and to get services and things. So
our website's a great place, navigatorbookkeeping.us. And then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn as well. So you can just search my name, Nate Hendrikse. There's not too many Nate Hendrikses out there, so you'll find me on there. Those are probably the two best spots. I'll also just share my email because, being a former teacher, I really, truly love questions. And one of our core values at Navigator is generosity. And I think that kind of shows itself in that we just want to add value to the community and be generous in the time that we're sharing. So if you have any questions, I honestly get so excited when I see like a random person email me with a question. I'm like, oh, I'm dropping things. I'm going to answer this question, which is maybe not the best workflow, but I do love answering questions. So my email is nate@navigatorbookkeeping.us, and that's just me. That's my email. I will answer back. So if you're thinking about anything on the private practice side, pay structures, a bookkeeping system, a dashboard, if you want me to share my ugly dashboard with you, it's ugly, but it does the job. Anything, just shoot me an email, and I will be very excited to add some value, hopefully, and hopefully alleviate some financial concerns that you have on your side.
Yeah, I love it. So thank you so much again for being with me today and having this great conversation around financials. And we'll see everyone next time. All right, bye. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed the episode and it empowers you as the CEO of your practice. If you enjoyed the podcast, please make sure you subscribe, share the message, and leave a review. If you want more information and support in growing and scaling your practice, click the link in the show notes to take advantage of our free resources or apply to work with me directly. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.